This is the introduction of the USA rental software written in MySQL with PHP, and we're about to go into 5.5 explanations for change. This is the introduction of the USA rental software written in MySQL with PHP, and we're about to go into 5.5 explanations for changes. The system currently is at 5.0. The changes for 5.5 are some necessary changes that are required for the system to function normally. I'm going to take us to the first issue. We're going to go to an existing ticket that has items that will say we're going to call off rent. Now, the items were put out, I think, around September 27th. We're going to go ahead, even though today is November 2nd, we're going to say that we're going to bring these parts back, that they'd already come back. They had come back on the 31st, and that the paperwork just reached our desk. So we're going to stay with the 31st on the paperwork, and we'll go ahead and mark them all as off rent. Now, we see here that the call-off rent date is the 31st, and all our information indicates that the 31st was the date that the rental stopped. Okay, I've just returned to the ticket, and what I'm going to do is since they're off rent, I'm now going to return the items. Let's use that same date. We're going to use October 31st, even though today is November 2nd. And I have the ability, or I do not have the ability here. I'm going to change an individual ticket. Want to show it returned. Want to change the date. The area right now does not allow me to change that date. So it's unaffected if I have multiple return dates. Again, we had the off rent on 10/31. We're saying it's returned on 10/31. So I'm going to change this to remain products returned with no problems. Now I want to talk about another problem right here. This button will need to be removed. This is also on the 5.5 list. If you change this ticket to close, then it does not allow you to do any more invoicing or perform any more operations for returning anything. This button needs to be hidden. This is one of the main items on 5.5. Now let's continue with all remaining items returned with no problem. We're going to go ahead and look at this, and it says that the stop date is November 2nd. The return date was the 31st. Now our issue here is, and this will be reflected in the PDFs, is that it does not reflect the date that the actual rental stopped. The actual stop date for the rental was October 31st and not November 2nd. If we do a invoice, and we generate an invoice, it will show through November 2nd. And actually the date that we said this returned or was off rent was the 31st. So what happens is, regardless of what date we put in there for the return, it always defaults to the date that the contract or the rental sales order or the return function or whatever, the date that is being actually processed. This is also reflected on the PDFs that are printed. So we have the issue again that we don't get to put in the date that we want. We also have this same issue with the outbound, and if I can take a new ticket, we'll give an example of this. Let's choose just a company. What I have, let's just put in some numbers here. This needs to be changed from need by date to start date. And part of that problem is we'll say today that needs to go out. We need to be able to affect this column to be able to put in an exact time. 10:01, 10:15, 10:16. And the same thing for this column. We need to be able to put in 9:01, 9:15, 9:17. Now here's an issue. We need to have the start date in here, and say this is a Friday and I'm filling this out on 11/2 on a Friday. I need to be able to change the start date to Monday, which would be 11/4 or 5. And what happens is when I put in a start date of 11/4 or 5, it still defaults back to the current date. And I'll explain this a little bit more in the next module here when I explain it in the edit function.